mark. Okay, the documentation's a little sparse here, so I'm going to click the class reference. And now what can I do with the UI alert view? Well, there's the method that we described very verbosely earlier. Turns out there's some properties: delegate, alert view style, title, message, visible. So we've seen hints of some of those existing. Add buttons with title, number of buttons. What do you like so far? Show. All right, so let's see what show is defined as. Show. So displays the receiver using animation. All right, so it's a really complex way of saying show the alert view. So let's try that. This is an instance method, returns nothing. So I just have to send a super simple message to my code. So I'm going to go on my new line here and say, how do I send the show message to this object? Just alert show. Right? All right, so let's see what now happens. I'm going to click run. Build succeeded. I'm going to go ahead and type in DAVID. And here we go. Go. Ooh. All right, so now it's a more respectable iOS app. Finally is the title. Hello, David is the string S that I passed in as the message. Thanks is the default cancel buttons icon, or text rather. And if I click that, it indeed goes away. So I can be a little more anal here. I'd like to make this a little sexier. Like when I see that prompt, when I click go, why is the keyboard still there? Right? Like you're seeing it through the translucent button. Let's clean this up. And I would only know this by Googling around a little bit. But what I'm going to do here before we actually display that alert is I'm going to do self.textfield resign first responder. So this is instructive if only because we've seen this buzzword responder before, first responder, the guy to respond to like a key press. Well, how do you say I'm done responding? How do you put something away? Well, if I send this message, resign first responder status, to the text field object to which I have a pointer in that property that I declared earlier, I can tell the keyboard go away. Like the user gave focus to the text field, this effectively blurs the text field. And again, it's not as simple as focus blur. I'd have to read the documentation to know what the message is called. But if I try this now, notice it's a little sexier. DAVID, go, and it goes away because it's resigned its first responder status. If I give focus again to the text field, it comes back, and it now goes away. So there's a bug, though. If I go up here and I type in prob again and hit enter, or even physically go down here, this feels unnatural, right? I shouldn't be forcing the user to hit go, even though they have a return key on the keyboard. So how do we go about capturing that? Well, who might know if and when return is entered? What do I want to wire to what, do you think? Yeah. Yeah, so previously we wired the go button to the go method, but we didn't wire the keyboard, or the text field rather, to that same method. But the text field should surely know when one of its buttons is pressed. So let's see if we can find that. Let me go into the nib file. Let me go ahead and control click on the text field. And oh my goodness, so many different things. And did end on exit, editing change, editing did begin. Unfortunately, if you just rely on the default by clicking control and dragging, you don't get the right event. But what I'm going to do here is I think the one I want is did end on exit. And again, completely unintuitive. But if you read the documentation, you'd see that defined. Let go, select go. And let's see if I remembered right. All right, if I click run, boot this up. I'm going to go ahead and type in RJ this time. And enter. Ah, nice. RJ. Let's do it again. RJ, no periods. Click enter. Finally. And it actually worked. All right, so how did I know this? Well, honestly, it's really by trial and error. Had I done it the other way, first, let's control click. Let's get rid of the X there. Let's just do the default and click and drag, files owner, choose go, on faith, good to go. Not quite, because if I now click here, notice that it's editing did end is the event that's assumed to be the default by Interface Builder, which is not correct. The one I used a moment ago was did end on exit. Again, completely unintuitive. And there's a slight distinction. Editing did end is what gets fired when you take focus away from the text field. But the catch is that hitting enter doesn't technically take focus away. What happens when you hit enter is an event called did end on exit. And I mention this because honestly, the first experience you'll have hands-on in lab and with the first project, there's all these stupid little things that are very easy to trip over, even when you have a super simple application. And I can't emphasize enough when first acclimating to this to really just kind of retrace your steps, go back to the sample code from lecture, figure out what's different between your code and, say, the lecture code, and you'll find that it's just these little tips and tricks that you'll stumble upon so that you don't make those mistakes again the second time around. Yes?
If you had code after the alert show method,
Okay.
would it get executed immediately?
Ah, very good question. So let's go back to my viewcontroller.m. If I had code executed right here, would it get executed immediately? Short answer, yes. So we can actually think back to our discussions of AJAX. This is an asynchronous call, which means the message show is sent immediately to the alert object, but the next line of code will immediately execute. And it turns out that that message box may actually take a split second to actually appear. So if you want to actually respond to the dismissing of that text, of that alert view, you have to adopt something known as a delegate and use a protocol of sorts. And we'll come back to that in just a moment, and that's, again, much like AJAX. These are asynchronous operations, and we'll have to inform the class if we want it to tell us something in return. Other questions? So let's propose a cliffhanger here. Suppose that the functionality I want to implement next is when I type in something like DAVID and click go, I like the keyboard going away. I like the message then coming up. What I don't like now, anal as I'm feeling here, is that when I click thanks, I don't get the keyboard back. It still says David. This is really kind of a sloppy application. I'd really like focus to be given back to the text field. I want to see the placeholder text again, and I want my cursor flashing there for the next round of this game. So in other words, we need now, per your comment a moment ago, we need some way of having the dismissal of that alert view window signal to my code to do those cleanup steps. Give me the keyboard back, give me focus back, delete David, and start anew. But let's go ahead and take our second 5-minute break here, and we'll come back and solve that problem. All right, I know it's late, but we're almost there, and this next stuff will be amazing. But it will make you better at this. All right, so we are back. So where did we just leave off? So we have an implementation of view controller now in both our H file and our M file that does relatively little. In the H file, we have a property to that text field. Notice we don't have a property to the go button. Why don't we need a property to the go button? It's not an IB outlet, and we don't really need anything. We don't need to pull anything from it. It, in a sense, is going to push information to us when it's clicked. So we don't need a property for that. And if I look now at my M file, notice that all I've implemented is that IB action. And that IB action is called go, and it just does all that UI alert view stuff. But what we don't yet have is the ability to detect when the user dismisses that UI alert view button labeled thanks. As an aside, IB action and IB outlet, what are these things? Turns out it's just a very clever typedef. Typedef is a way of declaring a synonym in C, in Objective-C, whereby you can give a new name to a data type. And so IB action is actually literally a synonym for void. And void means a non-existent return type. It doesn't return an actual value. So all Apple has done is they have declared that IB outlet and IB action are synonyms for void. So the effect of this is to have no functional impact on your code. The compiler doesn't care. But what Xcode does is it uses regular expressions, essentially, skims your code, and anywhere it sees an IB action, it realizes that it can put this cute little circle here, and it can put that name, go, into the little drop-down menu. Same thing in the H file for the IB outlet. This, too, is just, this actually isn't void. This is quote, unquote. So literally, it's a synonym for nothing. So if the compiler gets rid of that, it has no functional effect, but it does know to put the little cute circle and to put the text field in the drop-down that we saw when I was dragging and dropping the blue line. So it's kind of a clever hack, if you will, to make the interface builder work without having to fundamentally change the language. All right, so let's now wire together the thanks button with our code in a way that allows us to round off the last of the technical topics from the very start of lecture. So we looked at categories briefly. Let's lastly look at protocols. I'm going to go into some of the prefabbed code from tonight into a file called nib2 so that we don't have to rewrite all of that code again. nib2, I'll tell you up front, is almost identical to the previous example, except that in advance I have solved this problem of wiring the thanks button up with my actual code. So let's look at viewcontroller.h. Do you see anything different in this file? What's different? Yeah. Exactly. So we have UI alert view delegate, which wasn't there before. In the previous example, nib1, this file was almost the same, but that was absent. So the fact that I have UI alert view delegate in angled brackets just means that my class, viewController, that descends from UI viewController, is also going to implement some methods declared in that protocol. Now, I forget what they're called, but this is easily solved. Let me hold down Option, click on UI alert view delegate, click on the reference, bring up the documentation, and if I read this closely, you'll notice that if you add your own button, not that one, what do I want here? Scroll down, this one. Alert view did dismiss with button index. That is apparently, if I read the documentation closely, that is the method that will be called when the user did dismiss with a button index of 0, in the default case, that thanks button. So I just have to implement that now to be able to detect with an event listener that the button's been pressed. So let me go into my M file and see how I've done this. So what did I do here? Interesting. So alert view did dismiss with button index. What did I decide to do? So my comment is kind of spoiling the fun here, but when that UI alert view sends this message to my viewController object, I'm executing one line of code, which apparently does what? Clears the text field. How do I do that? I can simply set the property called text that's associated with my text field to nil, quote unquote, effectively. Setting it to nil is because of the setter, it knows to set it effectively to quote unquote. So that's how I clear it so that I see the placeholder text again, not DAVID. And then lastly, this, actually, I did not mean to leave this in the distribution code. This was me tinkering around before. I will remove this. If I leave that in there, as soon as the alert view comes up, it goes away, because I was experimenting with a different example. All right, I'll fix that on the online source code eventually. So there's one other difference between this file and the last one, but it's a little subtle. What else have I done that's different? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. So whereas last time the value of delegate was nil, this time it's self. So this is a very common paradigm in iOS, whereby when you call a method on some other object, in this case the object in question is this UI alert view object, and you want to inform that guy to whom he should send a message when he's done doing something, you can pass in a delegate reference, a pointer to some other object. In this case, who do I want to be informed when that button is clicked? Myself. And literally, I pass in, therefore, self. Now, this works because the UI alert view object knows to send the message called alert view did dismiss with index to its delegate. If it's nil, no big deal. It's going to send the message into a black hole, so no one hears that message. But if I'm telling it that I am your delegate, let me know when you're done being clicked on, send me a message, I just have to pass in self. And because I have implemented this method now, I can hear it. If I get rid of that, the message might still be sent to me, but it's just going to go into a black hole as well. But here I've intercepted it, much like registering an event listener with JavaScript or jQuery in the most recent project. Yeah?
I wonder who's holding the pointer to the alert when the method's done.
Who's holding a pointer to the alert when the... so we have in this line here, so this is where automatic reference counting comes into play. So we have here an allocation of the UI alert view object. We have a pointer here. We're then sending the message. Essentially, what is happening here is the operating system is going to keep track of who still has a pointer to that object. And because This is the only guy in existence that has a pointer to that object. Effectively, when it goes out of scope, it will be reclaimed when it's no longer in reuse. And let me wave my hand at the memory management details for now, because